Now that Fire Emblem Engage has been out for a few months, I think it's about time that we can take a look at it and fully analyze everything it has to offer. And to fully realize everything that this game has done, I figure I can also compare it to Fire Emblem Three Houses, the other Switch game in the Fire Emblem franchise, to see how they stand up against each other, to see which one truly is the better game between the two. In Fire Emblem Engage, the song that you listen to when you first boot up the game is very loud, it's very in your face, and it's letting you know everything that you're about to experience in this game. However, I feel like the theme, despite it being very loud, which is something that a few of the previous Fire Emblem games just didn't have in their main songs, it doesn't really fit the tone that the game offers. Fire Emblem Three Houses, on the other hand, does have a song that very well fits the game's theme, and stands alone on its own extremely well. When it comes to story-based music, or anything that's happening in the game, whether it's like big events or something bad happening, anything that happens during the actual story, Three Houses has very simple music that you'd think, like, well yeah, obviously this goes here. When it comes to story-based music, I'm gonna have to give the edge to Fire Emblem Engage, because Three Houses, despite it having music that honestly really fits all parts of the story, there is a lot of very same-sounding songs between each part of the story. When it comes to Fire Emblem Engage, on the other hand, every song, despite them being very different whenever they're placed in the story, overall is just very, very well fitting because of how different they are, because they fit these different tones of the story very, very well, which I feel like Three Houses kind of misses as it's trying to be a more minimalist type of take on the music. Lastly, we gotta talk about the battle music, and I'm gonna have to give this one to Fire Emblem Three Houses, because despite how many of the songs in Engage are so good, I'm going to have to say that all of the music that Three Houses offers is overall better quality. Engage does have a few very, very good songs, but Three Houses has a lot of very good songs. There may not be as many great songs that Engage has, but there is more songs that Three Houses offers that I feel like fits the tone of the battle, as well as keeping the player engaged in the battle much better. In Fire Emblem Three Houses and a few other previous entries, you were given one of many different options that completely change the story and outcome depending on which path you chose. Fire Emblem Engage completely ditched that and instead had one very strong linear story. And despite how good this story really is, I'm going to have to give the edge to Three Houses, just because even though it doesn't have as strong of a single story, when you play all of the stories that the game has to offer, it truly is the better experience than what Engage has to offer. One thing that Fire Emblem games are very well known for are the characters that each game has to offer. And in both of these entries, there are many characters that fit many different personalities, have many different weapon classes, and just overall, every character is great. Looking at what Fire Emblem Engage has to offer, there are a lot of very likable characters for all types of players, regardless of who you are. My biggest issue, however, is when you get these characters, they have very little screen time to truly show you who they are outside of the support conversations. In Fire Emblem Three Houses, despite how all of the stories are separated, if you take the time to play all three of the stories, every single main character in their story gets a lot of screen time to truly show you who they are even outside of the support conversations. So I'm gonna have to give the edge to Three Houses just because they allow the characters to flourish way more than they could in Fire Emblem Engage. Each of these games have their own gimmick and how they can change the tide of battle. Fire Emblem Three Houses, they had battalions. Fire Emblem Engage, they had the emblems. In Fire Emblem Three Houses, a battalion would essentially give a unit a new ability of some kind, whether it's a type of weapon that they cannot use, or maybe allowing other people to take another turn, or raising stats, whatever it may be. Battalions are extremely helpful. However, in Fire Emblem Engage, the entire game's gimmick is the emblems. Emblems essentially super power up your characters and allow you to do massive amounts of damage, with every emblem having their own unique attack, every emblem having 1 to 2, sometimes even 3 weapons that you can choose from at any time, regardless of what type of class you are. And sometimes, even if you're next to another unit with an emblem similar to your emblem, like if they're from the same series, you get to access more attacks and sometimes even get another turn, allowing you to really change the tide of battle and really think about every little thing that you're doing at any point. Don't get me wrong, battalions in Three Houses also kind of did this. If you were near your allies, it would boost the chance of hitting or dealing more damage. However, I feel like the way that the emblems were implemented were just so much better than battalions. When I played both of these games, my first playthrough was on the easiest difficulty available, as I simply just wanted to learn about the story. However, after completing each game, I immediately went into a second playthrough on higher difficulties. In my Engage maddening playthrough, you really had to think about every single move that you did, because the single square that you are off by could result in a dead unit. With Fire Emblem Three Houses, after I finished my hard playthrough, I immediately went to a maddening playthrough on that game. However, I found the maddening in Three Houses to be much simpler and brain dead in comparison to Engage. And I think a big part of that has to do with the way the weapon triangle works in both games. If you didn't already know, in Fire Emblem Three Houses, the way the weapon triangle worked is that you can equip a skill to your unit, which would essentially boost your weapon against the super effective weapon class. For example, sword against an axe, axe against a lance, and lance against the sword. They would boost the attack in said skill, but it wouldn't be an outright critical to non-critical ratio as it was in previous games. In Fire Emblem Engage, however, they had a break system, which essentially completely nullified any counterattack that your unit could do when they were attacked by the stronger weapon class, which definitely shows when it comes to the difficulty in both of these games. In my opinion, the difficulty definitely goes to Engage. In Fire Emblem Three Houses, you are introduced to a new hub area for you to walk around and interact with your allies, known as Gimmick Monastery. At Gimmick Monastery, you can enact different kinds of side missions, as well as doing different activities, such as leveling up certain skills, leveling up your units, fishing, gardening, making food, things of the sort. When you compare that to Fire Emblem Engage's Somniel, there are way more things to do and no time limit. In Fire Emblem Three Houses, you had an activity meter which you could level up throughout the game using your professor points, so that way you can do more activities every single time you visit. However, in the Somniel, you have no limit to these kind of things, and you have more things to do. More shops to interact with, more training things to do, even a few different kinds of mini-games. So when you compare the hub areas, I'm definitely going to have to give the edge to Fire Emblem Engage. In Fire Emblem Three Houses, you were introduced to a new side story called Cindered Shadows. You were introduced to 4 new characters and a set of missions, and pretty much its own little story, which goes side by side to the main story, even though it isn't plot relevant to the main game's stories. Upon completing this game, in any playthrough that you may be working on for Three Houses, you simply just have to go visit the underground and you can recruit these allies whenever you want. In Fire Emblem Engage, you were given the side story called The Fell Xenologue, which essentially takes all the characters from the main story and warps what side they're on. All the good characters are bad, all the bad characters are good. And honestly, I really think that storyline is way better than what Cindered Shadows had to offer. However, what weighs this one down drastically is in the Fire Emblem Three Houses side story, you essentially could choose between all of your units that were limited in that side story and had full access to their inventory, was able to build up the characters however you wanted. You essentially just got to play another Fire Emblem game. What Fire Emblem Engage does instead is every character has a pre-made set of weapons and items and things like that. Their levels are already at a set level, their classes are already pre-selected. It essentially does all the hard work for you, but it also takes the difficulty. Even on maddening, this is laughably very easy. Not only that, but with the Fire Emblem Engage side story, if you want to access any of the characters that this side story has to offer, you have to recomplete the side story in every single playthrough of Fire Emblem Engage. There is no way to get the characters without doing the side story. Don't get me wrong, it is very easy to get through the entire thing in just a couple hours, but that's a couple hours you can use towards redoing your playthrough of Fire Emblem Engage. I will give Engage this. In the DLC pass, there were a few waves before the DLC story where you would access special emblem bracelets, where were actually very plot relevant in the DLC story. So I will give it that. However, I feel like just the way it was implemented in comparison to Three Houses was a little sloppily done and could have definitely been better if it was its own side story similar to Three Houses and you wouldn't have to replay the DLC story every single time you wanted to get the characters in a playthrough. So at the end of it all, I definitely think Fire Emblem Three Houses is the better of the two games, simply just given the fact that the characters are way more expansive, the stories are just absolutely amazing regardless of which path you take. Except Golden Deer, which has some of my favorite characters, honestly has the weakest story of the 3 main ones, but overall, every story is really good. And then of course, the music. Sure, the gimmick and difficulty is a little laughable at times, however, I feel like everything else brings up the gameplay way better in comparison to Engage. This isn't to knock down Engage at all, I love both games so much. They are highly rated in my game collection, but I just kind of wanted to make this video essay to compare the two, kind of see what everyone else thinks of the two games, so please let me know down in the comments what you think of Fire Emblem Three Houses and Fire Emblem Engage. Do you guys agree with me? Do you guys disagree with me? What part of this video essay do you agree or disagree with me on? Please let me know. I would love to, talk to you guys down in the comment section. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you guys liked it, please make sure to leave a like. Also, don't forget to subscribe. And again, make sure to leave a comment down below. I would greatly appreciate it. Until next time, catch you guys later.